Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is e-billing for everyone, tips and trends, sponsored by Thomson Reuters Elite. Speaking today will be Ken Winnicky. The Industry Insight webinar series is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center. To stay updated on upcoming webinars or view previous videos, visit ambar.org/industryinsight. You can also stay updated on legal technology news through our blog, www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Ken Winnicky has over 20 years of experience working in the legal industry and has served as a regional sales consultant for eBILLINGHUB for nearly 4 years. eBILLINGHUB has been providing electronic billing solutions for over a decade to help lawyers streamline and improve e-billing within their practice. Thank you all for joining us. We will now begin the webinar.
Hello, everyone. This is Ken Winnicky from eBILLINGHUB. Good afternoon, good morning to those of you on the West Coast, and thank you for joining us today. I wanted to thank the ABA for allowing us to be a part of this series and for the time today, and I hope it'll be an informative session for everyone. The title, eBilling for Everyone, Tips and Trends. Probably I noticed even a little bit of a snafu on my part. We should have had it the opposite. We're going to start with trends and look at some tips for you to use going forward. So, again, we hope this is an informative session about the electronic billing world for law firms and leaves you with a few concrete, examples of things you might be able to do to improve your world in that respect, going forward. So, we'll get started here. E-billing has been, around and prevalent since really the late 1990s. So, different firms have experienced it at different rates and at different times, but really it's a phenomenon that's been around maybe not quite 20 years, but certainly at least 15 or so. Really with the advent of it, the promise of it was that, it would make life better and simpler for law firms, in addition to the corporate clients that instituted, these policies. But, that's not necessarily come to pass. And what we've found is, the answer to that, if we were to ask any particular firm that has to e-bill a lot, if it impacts the invoice to cash cycle, has it improved it, or, perhaps made it longer? Again, the promise of it really was to improve it, but, our studies and experiences working with clients, with law firms, with talking with them, with various industry studies are that it, in fact, slows down payment quite a bit. Again, there are exceptions to this rule, but in general, this tends to be, the average, the average difference that an e-bill makes versus a paper bill, in the life cycle of a billing, of billing a matter, via in the law firm world. The reasons for that, are various. So, kind of, to take a look at this and kind of understand the landscape that we're in these days. There are approximately 36 e-billing vendors out in the world. So again, we're talking some of the familiar names to some of you folks on the call might be Serengeti, Timetrics 360, DataCert, Allegiant, etc. So there are literally about 36 plus the 65 plus custom systems are all those corporations who found that maybe one of those systems wasn't fitting their needs and they wanted to create their own. So again, those of you on the call, some of you might deal with a particular company that kind of implemented their own EDI-based system to upload bills to that's outside of the commercially situated vendors. So again, you do have the potential of having to deal with 100 different interfaces or more, and that's typically growing a bit, out in the marketplace. So that's one factor that leads to kind of the complexity of the whole issue. The other is just the general growth. So what based on the industry averages, firms are billing a little bit more than a quarter of their invoices these days overall electronically versus traditional paper bills, and that representing just a little bit under a third of their overall revenue. Again, these are averages. When I meet with firms, I might meet one day with a firm that is billing 50% and 60% of their revenue via e-billing, just because they happen to have large clients or just high-dollar clients that are requiring them to e-bill. On the other hand, a firm the next day could be on the opposite end of the spectrum. So we all, you all have your, your different stories with regards to this, but this is in general the industry average. What we found as we look at our client base and what we do in working with law firms electronic billing is that in general there is an increase of about 30% in terms of e-bill volume year over year, meaning that more and more clients are coming to our law firms and asking them to e-bill them. That growth is slowing down just a tad because the market is not becoming necessarily saturated, but it is certainly becoming mature in that regard. But what we have noticed is that the trend is moving down to smaller companies. So your Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies probably quite some time ago have gone to e-billing and require e-billing, again, using one of those 35 systems or one of their own. So now the phenomenon is starting to trickle down to smaller companies because there is great benefit in general to a corporate client, using a legal spend management system, for various reasons. And again, that's starting to kind of push downstream a bit. When it comes to, again, that factor of ultimately how quickly are we paid or how slowly are we paid, and depending on what the case is, a lot of that has to do just with the steps of the process. So in general, the process by which a firm has to send an electronic bill versus a paper bill is greatly different. In a paper bill, traditional bill scenario, a firm has to print it out from their time and billing system, print out the final bill, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, send it out in the mail. E-bill world, much different, as we kind of see from this screen here. This is a LEADS 98B file. The Legal Electronic Data Exchange Standard is this acronym that LEADS stands for. There are actually about 6 or 7 different sort of formats within the LEADS standard, but essentially this is the program that by which most firms accept, or clients accepting e-bills have to, the format that has to be complied with and created by the law firm. So you can see it's a text, pipe delimited text format file. It's certainly not the easiest thing to read or to manipulate and work with. One little error in this kicks a bill out. So when we look at all the steps process an e-bill, you're talking the need to create a bill, format it in a LEADS file, fix whatever might need to be fixed, send it to a client, perhaps have it rejected, sent back if there are errors in it, and so the process kind of continues itself. So in terms of the uploading of a bill into an electronic bill vendor like a Serengeti or whatnot, it's certainly much more than just filling in a few fields and pushing send. It does lead to slowing down the process, more steps involved, and again, ultimately leading to some financial impact on part of your firm. Some of the financial ramifications of e-billing are kind of encapsulated here. We looked at the 14 days longer to get paid on an e-bill than paper. Again, there's a couple factors that go into that actually. One is, of course, as I mentioned, there's more steps to take to get an e-bill uploaded. On top of that, you have the potential for rejections and reductions, which cause the reworking of a bill and having to kind of push it back through that life cycle, which slows things down. One also has sometimes a situation where e-billing is a more complicated, time-consuming task than the traditional paper bill. So the billing department might need to set those aside, set the e-bills aside, sort of on the side of the desk, so to speak, for later in the week or a particular day in which those individuals will have the time to get to that work. And that by itself, as opposed to sending it out right away, getting it out the door, that in itself could slow a bill down by a few days or a week or so. So various different factors go into the slow payment, but it's generally definitely a phenomenon that law firms are feeling. The second figure here, 44% of all e-bills are reduced or rejected. I want to emphasize the word "or" in there, because if a firm is experiencing a 44% rejection-only rate, that would be a pretty tough pill to swallow. I don't hear of too many that are like that. Some vendors are a little bit higher than others and might creep up in that regard. But the reductions, when you factor in reductions or rejections, it can be as close to half. Again, this is an average, and my conversations with firms, one-to-one, I'll we'll talk about this stat, and sometimes I definitely get agreement that that's the firm's situation. Other times, a firm will dispute that, say no, ours is much lower, and certainly, that's great if it is. The lower that figure, of course, what you want it to be, but it definitely has an impact. And again, the life cycle of the bill, all ultimately impacting the finances of a firm. 2.7% of all e-bill amounts are written off. There's a variety of factors that go into this. Again, sometimes it's the mechanism of having to reassess a bill, have to fix a bill, the hassle, so to speak, that's involved with essentially writing off or changing a bill to get it accepted by your client. Well, what we found in some case studies that we've done is that there are times that firms will just have a sort of an unwritten rule, if nothing else, is to write off a smaller amount if it would slow down or impact a larger bill. So in other words, if an amount in dispute is less than $1,000 or even less than $500 or something, write it off as opposed to holding up that multi-thousand-dollar bill. So it's either just to streamline the process and get paid on the bulk of it, or not create any waves with your client, or whatever the case is. But a lot of the write-downs kind of add up. One particular study we conducted a couple years ago with a firm, they estimated that, frankly, they wrote off more than $1 million of revenue 1 year by just the fact of, for those factors of really not wanting to dispute amounts that I believe the amount in that case was under $1,000. So it can definitely add up quite a bit. What I a lot of times analogize e-billing costs to be is a bit to a house that isn't that isn't too energy efficient, right? You're sort of leaking money. You don't really know how or where, but it is costing you something, and e-billing is definitely one of those situations. Now, what certainly doesn't help in the e-billing world is sort of the complexity again that's introduced. So, kind of by virtue of this slide, it's a very busy, colorful slide. It is on purpose. Not every firm's situation, of course, matches this, but it's representative of some, and in some cases of many. What we're kind of looking at here is that we kind of start at the bottom. All those colored boxes represent different clients. So those of you on the call who e-bill, very well might have several clients who e-bill through bottom line or data cert, but none of those have the exact same requirements or format. So even if you have 5 clients that bill through bottom line, they all don't quite do things the same way, need the exact same information. The processes aren't quite the same. And so, as your various different clients build up, they all require their specific, nuances and formats. Depending on the personnel then that you have working on that, some billers might be assigned to multiple clients. Other folks are more decentralized and take the work in as it comes in. Various different players within the firm need visibility into the e-billing process, and it's a bit convoluted to find that. So again, as this screen is kind of trying to illustrate, you have collections people who potentially need to see what the status of the e-bills are. So they need to interface either directly with the systems, or more likely they're interfacing with the billers who have billed for those clients. You have the billing manager, whose job is to kind of keep it all together and be that, essentially in a way, be that liaison between his or her billing staff and management of the firm. You have the CFO and the finance directors who, of course, need visibility into where that revenue is going and what the status of it is. Then, of course, the partners and attorneys themselves who want to know, why hasn't this bill been paid yet? Why isn't it gotten out? Or really what the situation is with it. So it's certainly suffice it to say, a far from streamlined process. And again, another kind of illustration of how e-billing can kind of really start the gears can really start to wind down and slow down throughout the process. The end result, too, we took a look a little bit at the financial impact, but what was interesting is that a couple studies have been run on actually the cost per e-bill. So again, this isn't something that typically a firm would ever think in their wildest dreams it would cost that much to e-bill a client per e-bill. But back in back in the mid-2000s, ILTA conducted a study, and again, based on the various factors that we've talked about, the labor, the slowdown through the process, the write-offs, etc. They pegged the cost of every e-bill at $63 each, which again is an amazingly high cost, and I know nothing that something that none of us probably want to think is really accurate, but again, according to their information, was. Now, we through kind of a combination of ROI-related studies that we've done with clients over the years, and most recently, published last year, we found that cost to be a little bit lower. Firms either getting more efficient, and the criteria by which we, judge that, had changed a little bit, but nonetheless, the point is there is a cost associated with AirV eBill. It's not a simple and easy process of, again, basically clicking a few buttons and sending off your bill. The reverse to that is really on the corporate side. It's a system, as we kind of discussed it from the very first slide, makes a lot of sense for companies to be involved with. Obviously, this is legal spend management. They're budgeting and running their law departments more efficiently, and they are definitely seeing a reduction in legal spend of 12% according to the Corporate Counsel report from last year. Pretty common theme. That's the reason there are so many vendors and so many different corporate clients going in this direction. But again, the flip side of the 12% is that's 12% off of what law firms, of course, earn, and that kind of comes back to the collection realization that we'll look at in a little bit. So just to kind of provide a little bit of context of who we at eBILLINGHUB are, and where this information and how we kind of know this and are gathering not only, again, the trends in the industry, but some of the suggestions going forward, is kind of taking a look at this diagram as it animates a bit. So this is just sort of another diagram similar to what we looked at with the screen with all the individuals and the lines and the boxes and whatnot, the colors, spaghetti slide as some folks have called it. Again, you're talking about multiple billing staff, having to bill and interface with multiple different clients and vendors, all individually and one by one. In other words, if you have 25 clients, you have 25 different logins. 25 clients at eBill, in other words, 25 different logins that you have to undertake and connect with and whatnot. So that, again, is not a streamlined process. Where eBILLINGHUB comes in, and really the essence of what we do is we provide a single web-based interface through which a law firm can conduct its e-billing activity, help firms create, validate, and submit all of their e-bills, as well as give them a mechanism to track them in a dashboard and be able to start to run reports and analytics in terms of how, what their e-billing activity is. We pull that information directly from the law firm's time and billing system and enable that. So just a quick background on kind of what we do and why it's pertinent to this presentation is the fact that, we work with over 400 law firms worldwide. We've been doing this since 2002 when our system was developed. The concept of it was developed inside an insurance defense firm on the East Coast, and a few years after the technology was created, eBILLINGHUB was founded, and so we have been in the market working with law firms since 2004, so 11 years now. Over the course of time, again, grown to where we're representing large number of law firms worldwide, most of them being in the U.S., of course. But back on tax day of this past year, we surpassed our 10 millionth invoice process. So we hope and think that we've gained a certain amount of, well, not just credibility, but experience working in this industry, and enough to see if we've seen 10 million invoices come back and forth through our system, be able to start to gather some of the stats and the data that kind of surround that. So just a little bit of who we were, so that it provided some context to some of the numbers that we just talked about, and some of the trends that we wanted to share, and then ending with suggestions for you folks. So a couple of trends just to kind of take away and be aware of. We covered this, but to just do so again, I mean, to kind of hammer the point home, e-billing is continuing to grow. And again, especially for international and smaller businesses. So we saw that this, expect to see 20 to 30% growth in your e-billing activity over the coming year. So whether it's from, existing clients, but more so from firms that may not, or clients that may not have jumped into the pool yet, but certainly will be. Moving to smaller clients, I touched on that. So again, what you have are the smaller companies starting to look at some of those systems and find benefit in them, and ultimately they're going to require you to submit bills to them in that facet. Be prepared for extra other currencies. We've seen, again, a growth of for 13 to 20 plus currencies that we now e-bill in. Some very kind of obscure ones that you wouldn't think about. But what you're having with just in general the globalization of the industry, and more clients having an international presence, depending on the type of law you're in, you're going to be prepared to start to see sort of an international growth there. A little bit of a number, a lot of charts here. Again, just to quickly break it down, we just wanted to give you a sense of the average number of clients that we saw firms billing over the last 3 years, sort of a 3-year progression, and obviously it's stepping up and up each of the years. The graph on the left are for what that means is folks, firms that are e-billing fewer than 500 e-bills a month. So on the lower end of e-billing. In the middle there, firms that e-bill between 501 and 1,000 e-bills a month, and then the greater than 1,000 on the right. So, what you're seeing here, so if we kind of look at the under 500, we're showing an average of just under 40 e-bills per month for firms that bill, again, fewer than 500. Again, that's a pretty wide gamut. You have firms that only bill 20, 25 e-bills a month up to 500. But you can show that it's not quite doubled over the 2 years, but it's come pretty close. And the same really is true for all the other figures as well. So pretty much close to doubled for firms over the last 2 years. From a revenue standpoint, this is the monthly revenue billing that we are that we're seeing in the market. So if we look over the last 3 years, again broken out by less than 500 bills a month, the middle ground up to 1,000, and then the greater than 1,000. Again, it's really to no surprise, but just really kind of empirical hard figures on what is the growth from a revenue standpoint of the monthly amount being e-billed by firms over that period of time. Kind of looking 1 year over to the next, so going back to 2013 to 2014, just kind of a different way to look at this, because what we've all, again, we're still right around that 31%, that 30% number of invoices coming through our system. The number of firms that were added in that time, a little bit less than that. So the growth, it was greater than the number of firms we added. And what's interesting, though, is this last line here, the number of billers grew less. So now, again, that's using our system. You need fewer billers to get more invoices out, but nonetheless, the personnel necessarily hasn't kept up with the number of invoices growth. So I'm sure there's a lot of stress and strain on departments that have e-billing and don't use an automated tool, to help them with that. Industry trend number two is really along the financial ramification standpoint. Realization rates have dropped. So. Thomson Reuters has a service called Peer Monitor, and it conducts market studies of firms, both large firms in the AmLaw 200, but also many mid-sized firms. And so what they've noticed over really about a 6-year period was a 9% decrease in collection realization rate. So as we look at this figure, each of those colored bars represent a billed amount. The orange is e-bills less than $5,000 up to the purple bar is e-bills that represent more than $100,000 in billing. So that's what we're looking at here from each of the 3 years. And if we just kind of look at the 3 years progressively, it is going down. That's a good thing. Again, firms are becoming better at this. Hopefully, corporations on their end also are working with their law firms to improve these figures. So you're talking here where you have the low-end bills, the smaller bills last year, taking an average of about 35 days or so to pay. Even the large ones over 100K, just taking a little bit over 50. Again, these are figures compiled from our internal data, so results might vary, but nonetheless, the trend here is to show that average days to pay is coming down, although it needs to continue to come down even more, of course, to everyone's liking in the law firm side of things. So what we thought we'd kind of wrap up with here are a series of 5 quick recommendations, things that you folks can look at within your firms to really keep an eye on your e-billing, perhaps find some ways to improve, and essentially find some ways to push back on on some of those financial losses that are prevalent and may be occurring within your firm. So recommendation number one, billers should own the client. And so what we found, and again, there's always best practices here to share, and if you have a different experience with it, certainly you're entitled to that. But what we show is that when the same biller owns an invoice, really from beginning to end, as opposed to the handoff, as this indicates, it really does result in 10% fewer rejections. So what we're able to see when we work with firms is that, again, if an e-bill goes even between a couple hands, by the end of the day, it's going to typically be a little bit slower or risk rejection versus one biller really handling that task. And the rejections become important for a couple reasons. Again, it has financial ramifications to that, but we just highly suggest the biller owning the client as opposed to kind of a handing it off assembly line type of approach. Rejected, and again, from a financial impact standpoint, really what we're looking at here is 11 days. So when we look at our data and we look at those 10 million invoices, go back through the data and see that all the rejections, any rejection on average slows payment by 11 days. And so you start to multiply that by the revenue involved, and the math works itself out. So if you can reduce your rejections, you certainly are going to be ahead of the game from a couple standpoints. And again, having one biller work on things is certainly a step in the right direction. Recommendation number two is just kind of knowing what the numbers and the trends are. So if you look at this pie chart, these are the bills by practice area, e-bills by practice area. So the litigation area really leads the way, and I mentioned earlier that eBILLINGHUB got its start inside insurance defense firms. So again, kind of insurance defense, but also litigation in general driven has been driving the e-billing phenomena. The employment and labor, commercial law and contracts, and IP are really the biggest areas of e-billing. Financial, that falls into the commercial law, I guess, but you have the finance, banking, matters like that really seem to be driving. Financial institutions really seem to be big drivers of e-billing as well. So it's helpful to know, first of all, from your client base, what you're e-billing and to whom. It's also helpful to know your vendors. Now, a couple things about this slide. What we did on this slide is it's been sanitized. We've removed all the names, but each of these blue bars refer to or are aligned with a particular vendor, an e-billing vendor, such as Serengeti, Allegiant, Collaborati, Bridgeway, DataCert, etc. Right? So these are the average rejection rates across those different vendors, and with our average rejection rate across them all being 15%, which is a vast improvement over what folks probably see on their own. But it really highly depends on who you're working with. So kind of the moral of this slide is to really know the systems that you're working with, know which ones are better or not. You can sometimes sway your clients a bit in terms of who they may want to work with in terms of an e-billing vendor. But some are much better and more than others to work with. In other words, if you see to the right, we have a couple different vendors who have a fewer than 5% rejection rate. I mean, that's outstanding. Whereas a couple of their compatriots to the right, you look and they're up, in the high 30s. So, the more that you know about, the vendors that you're submitting to, and their requirements, etc. All the better. It's good to know what invoices are being rejected and why. So as we kind of open up this slide, if we were to take that 15% of rejections that we saw in the previous slide, we can kind of see here the breakdown. What are the big culprits in terms of why things are rejected? And again, we're looking at this all from the sake of if you know the reason, you can go back to the source root, the cause of it, and try to get that fixed. So narrative, tax codes, just rounding and tax errors. You have the timekeeper errors in terms of rates and titles. Those are big culprits. The budget's permission. So as much as you can control there and shrink that 15% or whatever your figure is, if it's more of what we talked about at the beginning of the presentation of in the 30s or the 40s, again, it's the more successful you're going to be in collecting more of your actual billed revenue. It kind of gets into the training your attorney. So what you want to do, if not train, work with, educate, do whatever you can to essentially help your e-bills get out the door more cleanly for the very reason that we've been discussing. So if we look at the top 15 most validated expense codes, your firm may or may not track this from your e-bill in terms of what gets rejected and for what. So for instance, E106, so online research from Westlaw or Lexis charges. So if a Lexis or a Westlaw charge slips into a bill and gets out to a client that doesn't accept it, that's an immediate rejection. You can see there's various other codes. These are the ones that we see are the most prevalent for rejection. So if not only your billing staff and your financial staff, but again, potentially your timekeepers themselves could know what they should and shouldn't put on a particular invoice, obviously it'll make your things smoother from your standpoint. Along those lines, stop words. So these are the top stop words that trigger rejections. So you can see here for yourself, and those of you who are working in this area probably are a lot of these look familiar. Again, things that if the farther upstream you can catch these errors, or perhaps you prevent them from even being put on a bill, the better off you all are going to be. So definitely from the train your attorney standpoint, and put that in quotes, it's really just kind of an education and knowledge standpoint from there to what can and can't go on a bill, because at the end of the day it just makes everyone's life in the firm easier. Fourth recommendation is training your clients. So really what, again, you want to do is open communication, having a good pipeline of information with the client to really try to streamline things and prevent those errors. So really what we're looking at here we looked at some of the reasons for the 15% rejections. Those were broken down by narratives, by codes, by the other is from a client setup standpoint. So a lot of times what's a bugaboo in the system and really kind of slows down the process is things like timekeeper setup and budget approval, login credentials. You can see them on the screen here. Right from the get-go, an e-bill is doomed if any of these factors are wrong. So the more that you can work with your client to make sure that you're transmitting the right information to them that they need, that they're getting what they need from you, that you're very clear on what they want and need and how and when and things like that, the smoother the process is going to go. So we highly recommend having this information, not even just something as simple as setting up a new timekeeper. That information needs to be transmitted to your client so that when your e-bill is sent to them, of course, it's valid, it's approved, and your bill goes through. So working with your client is really a critical component to all this. Catching problems early is really kind of our last really takeaway here. And so that gets a little bit back to what we were talking about, the train the attorneys, right, is making sure you know what can be billed, what can't be billed, and so forth. So take advantage of tools that help validate invoices before submission. That means catching those rules and errors before they get out your door. Now, again, that's something we do at eBILLINGHUB for firms that use our service. If you don't, there's a variety of tools out there. Some of the some time and billing systems have this inherent in them. I'm sure some of you on the call, your firms have those set up, but you can set up rules. The difficulty in those can be keeping them up to date and whatnot, but nonetheless, it definitely helps to have those inside your native time and billing system. Some of the new time entry systems that are out there, a lot of the mobile-related time entry systems allow, for rules validation, allow them to use our rules to do that, but there's the potential to. So what you want to do is, again, if you try to catch the errors upstream, it's just going to, again, make your life easier and certainly help that collection realization rate. A big no-no really is to submit the invoices and just sort of, again, rely on the rejection to tell you what needs to be fixed. So as this slide points out, but then you're really solving it after the fact. You've immediately slowed down payment by at least a week, and as you saw on average by 11 days. And that's just not a great approach to that. So again, really working with the client or working with the vendor that can help you validate early will make life a lot easier for you. So from a resources standpoint, again, we certainly welcome you to visit our website. There are several case studies on there. There's a trends white paper that's on, so eBILLINGHUB.com is where you can find us and find more information just about that in general. A variety of articles out there. This one was one that seemed to really resonate with some firms, and so we kind of highlighted a Wall Street Journal article from now about a year and a half, close to 2 years ago, on a sort of law firm e-billing and billing that firms may enjoy.